Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Area of Effect. Our first deep dive of the day is how to DM an MMO with Nick Grayson. For a quick bio for y'all, Nick left his master's in artificial intelligence to work at Blizzard Entertainment, leading efforts for collegiate Overwatch and esports tools. Now he works at Google as a product manager on Android. He's going to tell the story of his life as a dungeon master and the struggle of trying to run large-scale Dungeons and Dragons. Take it away, Nick.
Thank you, Abby. Hey, everyone. Welcome to this presentation. It's titled How to DM an MMO. Quick, just a bit about me. Right now, I am on Android at Google. I'm also working on some other unannounced projects. I guess one of them is a bit announced, which is Leyline. They have a panel later today. I recommend you check it out. I used to be on Blizzard Esports doing scalable technology and community programs. I also went to UCSD for electrical engineering, and I ran a lot of Super Smash Bros. Melee tournaments. So shout out to Melee. Today's its 19th birthday, and I owe so much to that game. So a lot of love. Okay, so I want to talk today about games, and I think that games are amazing for 5 reasons. And the first reason is the games are motivating. I think that there's no way I would have been able to do STEM if I hadn't played Minecraft when I was in high school. I messed around so much with redstone and sort of made me believe that I could do circuitry. I think that also we all know the feeling of saying, okay, just one more game and then I'll go to sleep or do homework. I personally have friends that aren't motivated by school or work, but are like top 3 in MapleStory. The second thing that I think games are amazing for is that they have this aspect of learning. It's said that good game design teaches you how to play the game, meaning you don't lose lives on the tutorial level while you're learning how to jump. But games can teach so much more than that. They can teach history like Civilization or Oregon Trail, and they can teach math, just like the Minecraft example I just gave. They also have this element of mastery, where you can build a nuanced understanding something deep below the surface to the point where you can like visualize the gears inside of the black box and sort of manipulate cause and effect. It might be a little bit hard to grasp, but I think that if you've played any games, you have a feeling of what I'm talking about. This could be something like you want to build something in Animal Crossing New Horizons, but you don't have the materials, so you go chop down trees and gather the things and get the pattern and make the chair and put it just where you want. I think the other really good example for this is Breath of the Wild. The starting area in that game is insane because it's like, oh, you need to get the 3 orbs, and one of them is on the cliff where it's cold, and you try to go up there and it's too cold, but there's some peppers right here, and you get those, and now you need some steak to cook it with, and there's a pig in the distance, and now you're running through the forest, all with this goal of like manipulating cause and effect to get the desired outcome. Or like, how do you win in Fortnite? Well, you don't die, and you get everyone else. Or like League of Legends, you can't just kill the inhibitor on the enemy's side. Next is narrative, and this is such an amazing portion, part of games. It's the story, the emotional resonance portion. But even more than books or movies, games contain an element of personal narrative, and personal narrative is actually like a therapy. I use it as a therapy term from narrative therapy, which is this form of psychotherapy that is focused on the stories that we tell about ourselves, and that by inlaying positivity in those stories, we can become happier and more fulfilled people. And games are really amazing at this. They tell you that you are the hero, that the evil isn't a part of you, it's something else, and you can defeat it. You have everything that you need, or you can go get it. And lastly is social interaction. Games bring us together. They teach us empathy. That it doesn't matter if you're white or black or old or young or rich or poor. All that matters is that you are nice, you help out, and you don't play a gnome. And connecting across these boundaries is so important in a world where labeling and othering is so common. We're disconnected by the technologies that we use, and that was all before the pandemic. So we have these 5 things. There's motivation, learning, mastery, narrative, and social interaction. And together, they're pretty neat. So I want to talk today a little bit about running D&D and these 5 things. And ever since I've been playing games, I've wanted to make them. So when I was little, I played Pokemon. And I remember having ideas about what I would love to add to Pokemon if I could. I would add a super cool Pokemon with a beaver tail that carried around a shell, and he would be named Dilbert. And as I grew up, I started playing more complicated games like World of Warcraft or EVE Online. EVE Online. There we go. Yeah, okay. So I dreamt of making worlds that people could live in, but such a big scope would be impossible. I could barely code. Making a whole world, there's no way that I'd be able to do that. It was a sad time until I found D&D. It was my own world to mess around in with my friends. It came with all the pieces, and they were so easy to play with. Dungeons and Dragons is a really cool game for this because the barrier to entry of game design is so low. I would make monsters and cities and wizards, whole worlds and their stories. Like finally, I was able to express my creativity and do what I've been dreaming of. So that's what this talk is going to be focused on. It's the things that I've learned using DMing as a creative sandbox in this way, and touching a little on those 5 themes I mentioned earlier, starting with motivation. And you know that motivation means homework. Now, it's pretty hard to be motivated to do homework, especially if the class is boring, especially if Wrath of the Lich King just came out. And so that's how it was for me when I was growing up. There was World of Warcraft or Minecraft or League of Legends in high school. League of Legends with its tantalizing icon asking me to just play one more game. And I graduated and went to college. And then I found Super Smash Bros. Melee for the Nintendo GameCube. And I started playing 4 hours a day and entering tournaments. And then I started running tournaments and doing community growth and building crazy tournament running tools in Google Sheets until one day I graduated. And then I got a job as an electrical engineer, which was cool. But what I ended up spending all of my time on was my contract work with TestBen, with Blizzard, running the first national collegiate Overwatch programs. I remember using all of my vacation time from my engineering job to drive to Irvine and work at Blizzard. It wasn't until I got a full-time offer that for the first time in my life, what I wanted to do every day was what I was supposed to do every day, which was an amazing time. But I couldn't help but realize that I'd sort of left this path of neglected things in my wake. I wasn't even using my engineering degree. And I think that I noticed a bit of a parallel between that and a sort of neglect, a feeling of neglect that I had, I'd felt personally, not as the neglector, but the neglectee, for some Dungeons and Dragons campaigns that I was running. And I think that it's particularly lonely having developed an entire world and then people not showing up because like you are the only person who lives in this world and everyone moved away. So I think that what's important to talk about is why people enjoy playing D&D and like what brings people in, what prevents this from happening. So I made a really big list of these things and I was like, what's an interesting way of presenting a list? So I found like a word cloud software online that lets you do fun shapes like a turtle. But I didn't have enough words. So here's some of the things that I like about Dungeons and Dragons. Um, and I think that what I really want to focus on here is that it's easy to lose motivation for big complicated things because there's new interesting things that are going to pop up and nerd snipe you at any given moment and distract you, or like there's always going to be new games. So the first thing I'd recommend for whatever grand adventure you're setting out on is that you figure out what motivates you and build that into the process. Build in your own motivators. That way it's easy for you to get up and work on this thing, work on whatever it is, and it doesn't feel like homework. It instead feels more like playing games with your friends. So next I want to tell a little story. It was summer at Blizzard Entertainment, and the TESPA team had like 15 interns, and the number of people who wanted to play Dungeons and Dragons was like 25, and I was but one lad. And I had seen horror stories of people trying to play Dungeons and Dragons with too large of a party size, and it stops being Dungeons and Dragons. And so I had this grand idea of, okay, well, what I'll do is I'll just run 3 concurrent campaigns where I'll just prep the same thing every week, and that way I can only have to run one campaign. It's just 3 running. 3 days of running, but it's like the same amount of prep. Now, that's a terrible idea because if you guys have seen the memes, you'll know that thinking that you're going to, the belief that you know what your players were going to do, uh, it doesn't happen. Like they'll always find some way of surprising you. They'll always turn left when you expect them to go right, and it doesn't work. But what ended up happening with this campaign is I went through about a month and a half of crazy, crazy Dungeons and Dragons all the time, and people started flaking out until there was about 6.5 people who actually wanted to play. And then we had a solid, good campaign. We finished with those people. And it was amazing, just like many other campaigns that I've gotten to play in. But as I said before, like not all the campaigns can have this. Sometimes it's just the DM who's left sitting alone and no one shows up for the game. But other times, and I have been guilty of this myself, it's the DM that doesn't show up, and everyone else is there and is ready and is waiting. So many things can cause a campaign to fall apart, and a lot of the time, it's not related to the game. Sometimes it's just life or a pandemic that gets in the way. So what I wanted to say is, don't let that discourage you. Don't pin all your hopes on completing this campaign. Like failure is going to happen, and you should try to learn from it. And success will happen too, and you should definitely try to learn from that too. Like what makes something that's good good. No one's born good at anything, and we all have to grow. So my second piece of advice is to really focus on learning throughout this entire journey, whatever journey you're setting on. And I'm not saying this is someone who's finished with my journey. I'm saying this is someone who's done a couple steps. Because by learning, you'll understand what's important and you'll understand how to really succeed later on. The next thing I wanted to talk about is mastery. So because community and esports was my whole shtick at Blizzard, the idea of being able to share D&D with anyone who wanted to play, just like I was able to share Overwatch tournaments with anybody who wanted to play with their friends, that was a really appealing thought. It was about this time that I was doing some digging online and discovered West Marches. Now, West Marches is a style of D&D. Just like you can have a campaign where the players spend all their time in a dungeon killing things for loot, or you could have a D&D campaign where players spend their entire time in high society playing political games of intrigue. Now, West Marches is taking your players and putting them out in a city at the edge of the map. Everything that's known is to the east, and to the west lies the wilds, ancient and forgotten lands with unknown treasure and danger. This is the furthest outpost, though, so you'll have to come back here before nightfall. What this style lets you do is have a campaign with way more people, and you could even have multiple DMs that don't have fixed parties. So you can have Jeff and Bob can play with Alice one night, and then Alice and her friends can go off and do a different adventure, and everyone just comes back to the same town, exploring various plot lines and learning about the world and leveling up and getting cool items. And I think that DMing is a lot like having a toolbox, and picking which tools to include uh, is about building a successful is like that's what building a successful campaign is all about. But it's also really about choosing tools that you enjoy, and that tools that you enjoy using. So in order to run a highly scalable West Marches campaign, I grabbed 2 tools that I was incredibly familiar with, that I learned about and used at work, which is designing for scalability and incredibly complicated Google Sheets. So I'm going to just do a quick little showcase of one of the Google Sheets that I made. So this is the world map, and this is not something that I showed players, but it's something that I use just for my own purposes. So each little square is like a 9x9 grid of emojis, and each emoji represents something. And you can see like land is roughly colored, and on the bottom right there's the city of Foxbarrow. And in the forest, there's like various different emojis for different monster layers. And what this let me do, what I built this thing to do, is I could take a XY coordinate. So there's like 11 and 12, which is this top right of the forest, and it says that it's the spooky raven tree. And then I built a like encounter generator. So at this time, it gave 6 swarms of fisherman spiders, which are these spiders that shoot out like electrically charged webs that they use to zap things and then reel them in. And then you can see that they're there because just to the left of the spooky raven tree, just to the west, is this little spider web icon, which is where they live. And then we do some more math and we figure out that while the party finds this swarm of fisherman spiders, they are eating or being eaten by, and then we look again for another thing, and we find wolves. And that's because the wolf layer is just a bit to the south. So we end up with 6 swarms of fisherman spiders eating a wolf. And so the players come across this and it's like, wow, this would have been happening whether we were here or not. And there's like actual ecology. It's very cool. Incredibly nerdy. I'm definitely not recommending. I'm not saying this is mandatory. I did this because it's the sort of thing that I'm into. The point is to chase what you're into and figure out how to share that beauty with others. So you can sort of think about this as being deliberate with your toolbox. Like, what are you putting in there? What tools do you go and grab? Like, how do you put tools in there that you can rely on, that you can grab when you need them? Um, so okay, that's motivation, learning, mastery. Okay, so narrative, good. The map encounter generator was really a tool to help DMs reduce prep time, but it's not for players. One thing that I did for players was on their first session where they made their characters, I asked them to tell me what their characters dreamed of, um, who they would become, what they would do. And I got answers between, I'm going to lead the light against the darkness, or I want to ride a griffin, or I want a chain of returning, the magical item from the book for my axe. And I took these answers and I put them in the plot of this area. So like all like the chain of returning was a thing that one of the players found, and it made it so that the players were helping write their characters. And you could go way crazier with this with a smaller group, where one player becoming the scion of the god of thunder means you have to make 3 people relevant. The other 3 people, I make sure that their ambitions are seen to instead of 30. So I kept it a little bit more tame. The point here, though, is that you can focus on leveling up as a writer, but to really hook your players, you can and get them to engage with the game world. The most important thing is to make them feel like a main character, to make them feel like what they want matters, and it's not just like, okay, well, here's the campaign that I wrote. Now make characters, and I'll throw you in, and whatever happens, your backstory doesn't matter. And they don't have to write like a 7-page backstory. Just like asking a couple questions about why they think their character might care about the central dramatic tension that everyone's worried about. So that's the oh yes, and then very important. Let me go back. So we talked earlier about personal narrative, um, which is the story that you tell others and about yourself. You tell your others and yourself about yourself. Um, so I think that's really what I want to the narrative note that I want to share. It's not about the story that you write as a DM, as a writer, just writing your own story. It's about the story that everyone tells together. And to really get players to be motivated to show up, to get them stuck and engage with the game world, um, figure out how to like add things that make the story their story, not just your story with them in it. Um, okay, and last is going to be social interaction. So social interaction, uh, like as a part of games, it's the thing that sets games apart, or like multiplayer games apart from single player games. And D&D, it's about the people who are sitting around the table with you. It's not about, I mean, maybe like for me, the world building, sharing my world, writing my stories, doing encounter design, all these things are super awesome and super highly motivating as a DM. But none of that compares to like feelings that the people around you are having, and the fact that you're able to gather as a group. I remember one of my longest running campaigns at Blizzard was I got a bunch of people together and we did collaborative world building. We made this awesome world that we're then going to go play in, and we did. We played in it for about 2 years, and I remember thinking like, oh, this was really awesome. I'm really glad we got to tell this story. There's like a lot of things I would change. I was sort of just doing a like a retrospective of it, and this was about a bit before I left Blizzard. And one of the events that coincided with this was one of the players in that campaign was getting married, and we were all coworkers, but the person who was getting married and our group's paladin didn't get along very well, like in real life. Not in the game, they were actually very close, but in real life, they didn't get along very well. When we had started playing, they would yell at each other. It got pretty heated sometimes, and I remember when I was at the wedding, our paladin turned to me and was like bawling and said, like, there's just no way that I would have imagined being here at this wedding and being so happy as her friend for her. And he said, like, it's because we got to spend all this time together and go on all these crazy adventures where our goals were aligned and we weren't uh, fighting for resources. And I think that like that's the kind of impact that running D&D can have, even if the DM doesn't realize it. One of the hardest parts about running tournaments or running D&D is that you're putting like a lot of work and stress on the tournament organizer or the dungeon master. And sometimes it can even feel like there's such a strong barrier between you and the player, like you're preventing the players from getting what they want, whether it's a tournament win or a magical item. Like you control everything, and so you're the enemy. But the players really do form like such strong bonds. This was actually something that I've had a lot of issues with trying to run a really, really big campaign. As the DM, not feeling as connected to the players as the players feel to each other. So this is something that I'm still working on. And one of the best ways that I've found to address this is by running lots of one-on-ones with sessions with players, because like it lets you get that meaningful one-on-one social interaction, but two, it sort of blurs the line between players and DMs, because now the players aren't necessarily a group, they're individuals, and sometimes one of them has information that the others don't, and they can surprise each other, and they can undermine each other, which obviously you have to be careful with that. But um, that's just still something that I'm working on in terms of D&D, and that's something that's not about how big or small the campaign is. Just running with people you're close to and hanging out with your friends is always going to feel better than hanging out with strangers. Okay, so that's the last piece of advice I have. So that's, you want to build in motivators to make it easy for you to do whatever you are trying to do. Make it feel like playing a game, not like doing homework. To focus on learning more than success, or that learning is in fact success. Being deliberate with your toolbox, thinking about how you approach problems, what you go to problem solve, and keeping those tools in good shape and on hand. Focusing on personal narrative, the story of the people around you, and how you set them up to be heroes, and that those people matter more than anything else. So that's it. I'm Q&A. Happy to answer any questions that people have.
Awesome. Okay. I am the omniscient voice here. So we have a couple of Q&A questions from our audience for Nick, this amazing dungeon master. Our first one is, what is your favorite experience? You kind of mentioned your wedding experience, but what is your favorite experience that happened in game but had IRL effects?
My favorite experience that happened in game that had our so there was one when I was running like the biggest scale campaign, which had about 35 people in it. There was one starting session where the group came in, made their characters, and was getting their first quest. And the game NPC told them, "Hey, well, in order to like, I know that the librarian needs some help with some ritual he's doing, some sort of scrying ritual." And it probably sounded like just like a fetch quest, but they asked me, okay, well, where do we go to talk to this librarian? And I say, well, I think he's downstairs. And this is pretty crazy because we were in the second floor of a building. And so they walked downstairs, and the player who was that librarian was waiting for them, and he handed them a little vial with some like just crystal shards that we got at like Michael's, um, and told them what he needed them to do for the quest. And yeah, so I think that seeing, and also that one had some younger kids in it, so seeing like the wonder on their faces, like, oh my gosh, that was really cool.
Another one, which is kind of interesting. What are some of your favorite Dungeons and Dragons themed other media? So, AKA, like, transmedia, maybe games that have been inspired by D&D podcast shows. Kind of interesting.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that like D&D is so like and relative to me, it's almost ancient, so it's kind of hard to find something that doesn't have at least a little bit of inspiration from Dungeons and Dragons. Honestly, I think that the entire isekai genre is pretty dank. So, like the being trapped in a game world, like it's really cool imagining not like, oh, this is my player character, but like, oh, it's just me and I got reincarnated and now I'm like the hero. I love that.
Sure, and then I also own thing. You got like Critical Role, and there's so many other. The Guild I know is also a web series. There's a lot of like
Mm,
runoffs from just D&D as a property and about the bonds that are forged together while playing it. No,
absolutely.
so definitely cool question. A fun one. What D&D alignment are you and why?
So I think the short answer is I am aspirationally chaotic good. But I think that the long answer is like it depends on how you define good and evil and chaotic and lawful. I think it's kind of boring to say like, oh, evil are just people who are like want to just cause as much harm as possible. I like the idea that you take the whole of everyone and try to like actually split it into three groups of sort of equal size. So you could do like good and evil. It's like, oh, that's how selfish you are, but then you could say like everything is selfish. This is a really philosophical question that I think it's like pretty interesting that it comes up so much. So yeah, my short answer is I think I'm chaotic good.
And then we kind of talked about this because you just said literally that D&D has been around for so long. If you think about Gary Gygax and just the history of the world itself, but how have you seen the PR public-facing reputation of D&D change over time?
Well, I think yeah, I mean D&D was built. D&D was built before there were computers, before there were like there was the internet. I mean, before computers, before the internet. So uh, there's the game. This is sort of like a. I guess this question is a bit about Wizards of the Coast and just a bit about like how D&D has changed. Um, so uh, I think that it's interesting to see how like a lot of social norms have evolved as a part of D&D, and I think that the Wizards team is really putting a lot of effort in on this now. Um, like there's the newest book came out, Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, has um, different like options for making any race sort of be able to do anything. Or this is a this question could go so many different ways. Yeah, I think that I guess I would love to talk just a little bit about um like D&D was made before there was any like there couldn't be video games before there was D&D because we
Hmm.
didn't have computers. So what would the people who made D&D originally, what would they have built if they had access to all these things? Like, what is the target that they were trying to hit with this game that they built? Like, they were trying to make some experience, and this was the best that they could do with the technology at the time. But like, if they had even more resources, if they had even more tools in their own toolbox, like, what could they have built? I think that's a really interesting thing to think about.
Hmm.
Because people
Interesting.
still play D&D, right? So
Yeah,
it must be good. It must be better than games for like in some ways. So
that's been lasting for so long.
yeah.
Yeah, that's very true. Interesting. We have some specific ones that I think are from very specific people in chat. What do you consider to be the most OP combination of race, traits, etc. in D&D? Asking for a friend. Smiley face.
Right. Um, I personally have always enjoyed playing wizard with the subclass of divination, where it's like when you're sort of able to tell the future, and the way it works is at the beginning of every day you roll 2d20s, and you get to take those two and replace two other rolls with those throughout the day. Because you can really get away with a lot if you're like, if you know exactly what you're going to be able to roll. Yeah, I think that there's like, it's really surprising. There's so much. I guess it's not that surprising. So much resources online
Uh,
about like really strong combinations and different things. I think that like that's definitely what I started when I started playing D&D. I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna like min max everything and make the most overpowered possible wizard. And the more I've played, I'm like, I actually just enjoy having my character be like a little dumb and like make lots of mistakes, um, and just like be silly. So I think it's like I don't know. It's sort of whatever floats your boat.
individualistic journey for each
Hmm.
player. Yeah. Another fun one. Why are gnomes the worst in D&D?
So I know a lot of people don't like gnomes, but I actually really like gnomes. So they're small. They can like, you can make a illusionary box and you can hide in it. I think that's pretty cool, and you can like shoot stuff out. Um, but they are slower than everyone else, which is pretty bad. So they can't really run away.
This is like a fun one because I feel like you've shared some like really like important stories. Do you have an example of a hilarious event that happened in game? Because you've spoken of some sweet ones and some kind of
Hmm.
life changing ones, but what's just one that was like a total meme?
Okay. At the beginning of one campaign in the first session, there was just like everyone made their characters, and then we had the first combat. They were protecting a caravan, and there was an owl bear attack. And owl bears were really scary for
Yeah.
a little first level character. And the group sorcerer thought he was hot and spicy stuff, so he thought he could like take on the owlbear single-handedly, and it just knocked him out in one hit. And then the rest of the party finished the owlbear off, and someone went over to try to like help stabilize this sorcerer who was bleeding out on the ground, and specifically said that he wants to like treat the wound with his knife. And then he rolled a natural
Okay.
one on medicine and killed his friend,
No.
which would have been a lot more sad if this was like a more like developed character. But
Yeah.
it was the first session, and I think they gave each other a lot of shade for that for a while.
Uh, an interesting kind of technical question. Have you played other systems outside of 5e?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really worth playing a lot of different systems because they all handle things.
Yeah,
And they have different focuses.
totally.
Like D&D is a lot about, well, whatever you want to do, like we're gonna make it work as long as it's sort of this fantasy. Um, I really have spent a lot of time looking in OSR, like the old school rules, which is more like original Dungeons and Dragons. That's sort of tied with the West Marches style. Um, Also, there's such a wide spectrum. Like there's a game called Dread where there's
Hmm.
no dice. Instead, you play with a Jenga tower, and it's a horror game. And every
Ooh.
time you do anything that's like kind of hard, you have to take out Jenga blocks and put
Oh
them on
no.
top. And, and so it's like really, it gets really scary. Like the suspense
Yeah.
of what's going to
Is
happen
it gonna
with
topple
also,
over?
yeah, exactly. That one's really cool. I played. There's another one called Mouse Guard, which is sort of like Redwall flavored. But they have like a really interesting aging mechanic where like younger mice are everyone's a mouse. Younger mice are like better at certain things, and older mice are better at other things. And like when you're learning, like the experience thing, like you level up individual skills, and you need failures and successes in order to level. Which again, I think that's really cool because like I said earlier, um, failure is a super important part of the learning process, but so is like trying to learn from success. So I loved that.
Cool one, because we talked about this earlier on the audio panel. It was basically, where do you look for inspiration as a DM? So like it did say particular media we talked about earlier, people in your life, other D&D streams or shows you watch, other movies, TV. Like where do you find your inspiration as a
Oh
dungeon
yeah,
master?
that's a great question. I definitely find it from like all over the place. Like if I've been talking to a friend and they've been having like really intense family drama, I'm like, okay, perfect. All those family members are now just like the royalty, and their drama is going to cause the collapse of the city. Or like, uh, there's a bunch of really interesting documentaries uh, that are there's. I was been watching this one series on YouTube called The Fall of Civilizations,
Hmm,
which is about a bunch of like ancient civilizations like the Aztecs or like
interesting.
Rome, or my favorite one was the Bronze Age collapse, which is like ancient Egypt and pre-Greece and like the whole Mediterranean, like their entire trade empire, and how like it all just got destroyed in the span of 50 years and no one really knows why. Um, so stuff like that I think is really really cool. Like honestly, real life. There's so much that I enjoy stealing honestly from
Yeah,
other like media, but real life has some really juicy things. Like like I would never be able to believe that like this crazy coincidence in real life happened, but it did. So now like when I steal it, I'm like I'm not making it up. Like it's possible.
exactly. And then one of our second to final questions is, what's the most important thing to do as a DM to help their players interact better?
That's a good question. That's a good question as well. I have like a set of table rules that I always give my new players and say like if you're playing with me, like here's what you have to do. And like the first one is that it's the job of the everyone at the table to make sure everyone else is engaged and having fun.
Hmm.
So don't do things that make it easy for other people to disengage. And if you like fun, there's not like a finite amount of fun and you have to take it for yourself. Like it's definitely the type of thing where you can have more fun and then everyone else can have more fun as a result. So making decisions like that is really good. And then also just like try to stay off your phones. I also
Yeah.
say no dice towers because it's like really distracting when they fall over. And but yeah, those are just a few things.
Little simple tricks to make it
Hmm.
more productive and easier. Okay, so final, basically, do you have any final tips, tricks, advice, quotes, inspirational speeches to all of these D&D aficionados and maybe future dungeon masters?
Yeah. Let me make sure I'm not. I don't want to paraphrase this horribly. So there's a Kurt Vonnegut quote I really like, which is, "What should young people do with their lives today? Many things, obviously, but the most daring thing is to create stable communities in which the terrible disease of loneliness can be cured." And I think that that's what this event is doing. So just wanted to give a shout outs to everyone who's running Area of Effect, and Abby, thank you so much for hosting. And yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Do you have any final like socials or things you really want people to find you if they have further questions or anything you'd like to shout out in particular?
Um, Shout out to people running the event. Shout out to Leyline. Go check out that panel later. Shout out to Super Smash Brothers Melee again. It's 19th birthday. Free hashtag free Melee. And I believe my Twitter is at the Techno Wizard. So you can find me there. Let me double check that. Yeah, that's me. Perfect. The Techno Wizard. Thanks everyone.
Awesome. Thank you, Nick. So we are going to go to a commercial break, and after that, we will be starting our community and kindness panel. But before that, a quick shout out to our partners, Almid. Almond runs and supports nationally sponsored community, collegiate, and convention esports events across the U.S. since 2015. Their esports teams are also currently ranked Division I top 10 in the North American field. Corsair, the largest global developer and manufacturer of high-performance gear and technology for gamers, content creators, and PC enthusiasts. And TESPA, the largest collegiate network of college students, competitors, and club leaders across North America. We'll see y'all back after a short commercial break.
My name is Sean Andalcio. My gamer tag is Mandalcio. Really involved in League of Legends.
Hi everybody, I'm Leslie O'Neill. I work with the Akron Summit Convention and Visitors Bureau.
I'm Chris Volpe, the president of Multivarious, a game development studio in Columbus, Ohio. I'm also the president and founder of the Ohio Game Developer Association and the executive director and founder of GDEX.
Hi, my name is Alex or Valkyrie. I'm a two-time national champion in the HSCL.
So my name is Jess Brohard, and as a profession, I'm an esports event host. I recently was doing the stage hosting, interviewing, and sideline reporting for the Call of Duty World League, now called the Call of Duty League.
So I play League of Legends for the University of Cincinnati.
My very first game was Super Mario Brothers on a Game Boy. So I've been involved in games for a really long time.
I started playing video games probably when I was around 4 or 5 years old. Started out with the GameCube. So the game that got me interested in competitive esports was Rocket League. I started playing and I got hooked to the game. I play soccer. So I just kept playing the game over and over again, and I realized, hey, I'm getting pretty good.
So for some reason, Team Fortress 2 was like one of the games that I played in college that just really got me excited to play versus other people instead of just, because of course I love single player games and Final Fantasy and all that, but what really sparked that competitive edge in me was TF2.
I've actually grown up my entire life playing traditional sports.
I think you can apply some of the same fundamentals and some of the same best practices as far as team building.
They're definitely different. Traditional sports, I think, just have a sort of place in human psyche and tradition and society.
The only thing that is missing is the physical aspect, but if you take sports like chess, there isn't really that much of a physical aspect in chess.
Teamwork, discipline, and practicing, and just feeling inclusive and part of something bigger.
As esports grows, you just keep seeing, oh, that's something that traditional sports already does. And it's kind of following a similar model, but also being its own.
I think the biggest difference is probably the level of balkanization. So for example, in America, our big three sports are what? Like basketball, baseball, football, right? Right now we got a Smash tournament outside, but the fighting game community has Tekken, has Mortal Kombat, has all sorts of things, right? And that's just one genre for the fighting game community.
It's less physical than traditional sports and contact sports, I guess. So it's less contact, but the mental stamina that it takes to compete, I think equally it would be as equal to the mental stamina it would take to compete physically, if not more.
And a lot of kids get made fun of for being bad at sports or not being able to run fast or jump high. They're not as adept with that, but they may be twice as good as anybody else at esports or at any kind of video game. And I think it just fills that niche of everybody belongs somewhere, and I think esports is a place for a lot of people.
It's gonna grow, obviously. I don't think it'll ever replace traditional sports.
The future of esports is so hard to predict because we've seen so many things that have worked so well and then so many things that have not worked as well.
I think the future's already here. I think the writing is it's clear that esports is going to be coming in. The viewership is huge. When you look at almost every other sporting event, the viewership is on par, if not better.
So I think millennials were the first generation where the internet was just a part of the environment, right? I think as they grow older and Gen Z and whoever comes next, right, gaming and competitive sports is on, through e-gaming, right, whatever, is just going to be more of a part of life. Right. So I don't think it'll ever replace it, but I think it's just going to be a growing thing, right? Games are everywhere, from consoles to computers to, our cell phones.
I think over the next 5 years, we'll definitely see a true economic impact on the community once we just continue to raise brand awareness or raise awareness of brand partnerships and creating those relationships. I think we'll definitely see, significant growth and impact.
You're starting to see a lot of really interesting player dynamics, a lot of sponsorship opportunities, and you're beginning to see collegiate involvement, which is always big, trying to figure that out. So I think the next 3 to 5 years is going to be a foundational time for what esports will look like for the next 50.
What is my favorite thing about esports?
Oh gosh, the excitement in the room when players, no matter what level, whether you're pro, semi-pro, amateur, you're just playing for fun. Every sports event that I've attended, the energy in the room from the fans and just the competition component of it, it's exciting.
I have friends who live in California or who live in Michigan or who live in Wisconsin, and it's not easy to get a plane out to Wisconsin, right? But maybe, you know, every other weekend we can get together and play some League.
Esports communities make the world feel a lot smaller and a lot more manageable because you have your little community of people who enjoy watching or playing the same game that you do, and even if they're from Finland and you're from California, like, you can still kind of be brought together and unified over this game that you love.
I think the hype that you don't get from sports like soccer. Like, scoring a goal is hype, but you only score like a goal or two a game, and that's over the course of 90 minutes. A Rocket League game takes 5 minutes, and I get just that equal amount of hype in 5 minutes versus 90 minutes.
I think my favorite thing is just how new it is. I've always been a really big fan. I like to jump into the pool where nobody really knows what's going on. And esports is so new that people are trying to figure it out. There's no answers for these things, right?